After a 15-city live tour, I'm finally back in the studio. It's been an amazing journey. It's been great to meet the fans who love my weird, dark, and mysterious stories in person. Those moments are still fresh in my mind, but I knew from the start that there was a story I needed to tell as soon as I got back. This story, which was the last song on the tour set list, got the strongest response from the thousands of live audience members. If you didn't get a chance to go on tour, you're in luck today, because you're about to hear the best story from my tour right now. We actually briefly touched on this story about 4.5 years ago, but I didn't really know how to tell it properly. The video was short and left out a lot of important details. But now, the story has been completely restructured, rewritten, and refined to make it stronger, deeper, and more haunting. The story is called What's in the Basement? And I guarantee that even if you've heard the previous version, you'll be captivated by this new telling. But before we get into the story, if you love the strange, mysterious, and dark told in a compelling way, you've come to the right place. That's what I do. We upload new content every week, so don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a story. Now get ready. Let's start with today's story. What's in the Basement? In the fall of 1986, as yellow leaves covered the path outside the Bowen family's cottage, a gloomy atmosphere prevailed. Frank Bowen, a devoted father, struggled to keep his family going through the pain of loss. Just a few weeks earlier, his beloved wife, the wonderful mother of his 2 daughters, Tina and Karen, had suddenly passed away from a terrible disease called cancer. This loss not only left a hole in their hearts, but also put the family in a difficult situation, as she was an important contributor to the family income. Frank, although he wanted to be with his 2 daughters to share the pain, financial responsibilities forced him to work longer hours, often working night shifts. Meanwhile, Tina, 15, was at an age where she needed attention, and Karen, her 9-year-old sister, was still innocent and vulnerable. During the long nights without their parents, the 2 girls hugged each other and cried, missing their mother terribly. Every room in the house seemed to still have the shadow and laughter of their mother, but the silence now only added to the grief. One October evening, as the cold autumn wind blew through the window, Tina and Karen decided to do something to ease their pain. Sitting by the flickering light of their nightlight, they talked about their mother, about the beautiful memories, and the strong desire to hear her gentle voice once more. Tina, with her curiosity and strong spirit, suddenly remembered something they had bought at an antique store not long ago. A Ouija board. Karen, do you remember the Ouija board we bought? Do you think we could try to talk to Mom? Tina whispered, her eyes filled with hope. Karen, a little hesitant at first, was drawn to this bold idea. Do you think Mom can answer us? I really miss her, she choked out. Without hesitation, the 2 girls retrieved the Ouija board from an old cabinet in the living room. The board looked simple enough, with letters A to Z, numbers 0 to 9, and 2 boxes for yes and no carved into the corners. In the center was a small planet, a transparent plastic teardrop pointer that could move across the board. Tina placed the board on the old coffee table in the living room, the dim light from the table lamp creating a mysterious atmosphere. Karen nervously placed her finger on the edge of the planet, and Tina followed suit. They both closed their eyes and took a deep breath. Tina said slowly, "Mom, are you here with us? If you can hear us, give us a sign." The planet initially stood still, as if it were just a lifeless toy. But then, to Tina and Karen's amazement, it slowly moved. First, it floated to the yes square, The two girls opened their eyes wide, gasping for breath. Karen whispered, "Sister, did you do it?" Tina shook her head, her heart pounding. "No, I didn't. Maybe Mom is really here." The journey with the Ouija board began, each question asked with hope and tears. Whether they were really communicating with Mom, they didn't know. But in that moment, the two girls felt closer to Mom than ever. They looked down at the darkness of the first floor, where the light from the second floor couldn't reach. Both felt a chill run down their spines. Karen, the younger sister, held Tina's hand tightly, whispering, "Sister, I'm scared. Should we go down and check?" Tina, though also worried, wanted to appear strong to comfort her sister. "It's probably just the wind, Karen. I'll check. You wait here." But Karen refused to let go of her sister's hand, insisting, "No, I don't want to be alone. Let's go together." Tina reluctantly agreed, and the two of them began to descend the stairs, stepping lightly and carefully so as not to make any noise. The knocking continued, irregularly, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, as if it were moving through the rooms below. When they reached the first floor, they stopped at the foot of the stairs, straining their eyes to look around in the darkness. The house was eerily quiet, except for the knocking. The sound seemed to come from the living room. Tina took the lead, and Karen followed closely behind her. The living room was dimly lit by the moonlight filtering through the window. The objects in the room appeared dimly, like ghosts standing silently. Tina glanced around the room, seeing nothing unusual. But as they stood still listening, the knocking suddenly sounded again, this time clearly coming from the kitchen. They turned around, looking toward the hallway leading to the kitchen. Karen trembled. "Should we call Dad? I don't think we should be here." Tina held her hand tightly, trying to reassure her. "We're just checking. If anything strange happens, we'll call Dad right away." They entered the hallway. The door leading to the kitchen was ajar, revealing a small slit of light from the moonlight outside. Tina pushed the door open gently, and it creaked, echoing in the quiet space. The kitchen was empty, no sign of anyone or anything. The knocking sounded again, this time right next to her. Karen let out a small scream, turning her head to look around. The sound came from the door leading to the basement, an old wooden door with a tarnished brass handle. Tina tried to stay calm, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "It's probably just a pipe or a mouse. Don't worry, Karen." But the tremor in her voice betrayed the fear she was trying to hide. Karen pulled Tina's hand back as her sister reached for the basement door. "Don't! What if there's something down there?" Tina turned back, gently placing her hand on her sister's shoulder. "I'm just looking, not going down. We need to know what it is so we don't have to be scared anymore." She slowly turned the doorknob, opening it. The stairs leading down to the basement were pitch black, a cold draft of air blowing through them, making them both shiver. Tina turned on the flashlight from her small phone, the weak light shining down, revealing the old wooden steps. The knocking stopped completely now, leaving a deadly silence. The two stood still, not daring to go down, but also unable to leave. Then, from deep within the darkness, a new sound came, clearly footsteps, slow and heavy. Karen burst into tears, hugging her sister tightly. Tina began to panic as well, stammering, We need to get out of here, now!" The two turned and ran, climbing the stairs to the second floor as fast as they could. As they reached the top of the stairs, a loud bang sounded from the basement door, as if someone or something had slammed it shut. They rushed into the bedroom, locked the door, and hid under the covers. Outside, everything was quiet again, but the feeling of being watched did not go away. They did not dare to sleep that night, just huddled together, waiting for the sound of their father's footsteps to return as the last ray of hope in this nightmare. After losing their mother, Tina and Karen were faced with an inconsolable grief. One evening, while trying to find comfort, the two girls decided to try using a Ouija board in the hopes of connecting with their mother. The call from the Ouija board. The two girls sat down in the basement, carefully placing the Ouija board on the table. They gently placed their fingers on the planchet, holding on to the belief that their mother would appear. Tina, the older 12-year-old, spoke first. "Mommy, are you here with us?" Time seemed to stand still as they waited. But nothing happened. Karen, 9, tried again, her voice trembling. "Mommy, if you can hear us, please give us a sign." There was still silence. For an hour, the two girls kept calling, but the Ouija board did not respond. Frustration filled the air. Finally, they folded the board and went upstairs to their bedroom, their hearts heavy. The strange knocking. As they lay in their room, the lights were off, and the house became eerily quiet. Suddenly, from somewhere below, they heard a knocking sound. At first, the knocking was sporadic and gentle, like the sound of machinery or trees outside hitting the wall. But after a while, the knocking became rhythmic. Karen turned to her sister and whispered, "Did you hear that? It's not like a normal sound." Tina sat up, trying to listen more carefully. The knocking continued, as if to attract attention. Suddenly, an idea popped into Karen's head. What if? What if it's Mom? We've prayed. Maybe Mom's here." Karen's words also excited Tina. She asked loudly, "Mom, if it's you, please knock 3 times so we know." Immediately, knock, knock, knock. The two girls looked at each other. Their hearts stopped. They couldn't believe their ears. They continued asking, "Mom, if you're here, please knock 3 more times." This time, the knocking came more slowly, but still 3 distinct knocks. Follow the knock. A feeling of excitement mixed with fear filled the two girls. They decided to follow the sound to find its source. Leaving the bedroom, they carefully walked out into the dark hallway and headed for the stairs. Step by step, they went down to the first floor, still hearing the knocking leading the way. The knocking continued, as if inviting them. It led them to the basement door. Tina opened it, and both girls stood on the steps, looking down into the dense darkness below. Karen asked, "Mom, are you down there?" Knock, knock, knock. Despite their excitement, they were too scared to go down to the basement. They stood there, asking a few more questions and receiving answers in the form of knocks. But after about 30 minutes, the knocking stopped, encountering Dad. So excited by the experience, Tina and Karen decided to wait for their father, Frank, to return. When Frank entered the house in the middle of the night, the two girls ran up to him, their eyes shining as they told the story. "Daddy, Mommy was here. She answered us with her knocks. We talked to her." Frank looked at his two daughters, silent. He felt the excitement, but at the same time, the sadness of loss was still evident. He said softly, "Girls, I'm sure your mom is here. She's always watching over us and watching over us." Although Frank wasn't sure about the knocks, he knew that the girls' faith was their greatest comfort at the moment. After losing their mother, Tina and Karen were left grieving. One evening, in an effort to find comfort, the girls decided to try using a Ouija board in the hopes of connecting with their mother. The call from the Ouija board. The two girls sat down in the basement, carefully placing the Ouija board on the table. They gently placed their fingers on the planchet, holding on to the belief that their mother would appear. Tina, the older 12-year-old, spoke first. "Mommy, are you here with us?" Time seemed to stand still as they waited. But nothing happened. Karen, 9, tried again, her voice trembling. Mommy, if you can hear us, please give us a sign. Still silence. For an hour, the girls kept calling, but the Ouija board didn't respond. Frustration filled the air. Finally, they folded the board and went upstairs to their bedroom, their hearts heavy. Strange knocking. As they lay in their room, the lights were off and the house was eerily quiet. Suddenly, from somewhere below, they heard knocking. At first, it was sporadic, soft, like the sound of machinery or trees outside hitting the walls. But after a while, the knocking became rhythmic. Karen turned to her sister and whispered, "Did you hear that? It's not like a normal noise." Tina sat up, trying to listen more closely. The knocking continued, as if to attract attention. Suddenly, an idea popped into Karen's head. What if? What if it's Mom? We've summoned the spirits. Maybe Mom's already here. Karen's words excited Tina too. She raised her voice and asked loudly, "Mommy, if it's you, please knock 3 times so we know." At once, knock, knock, knock. The two girls looked at each other. Their hearts stopped. They couldn't believe their ears. They continued to ask, "Mommy, if you're here, please knock 3 more times." This time, the knocking came more slowly, but it was still 3 clear knocks. Follow the knock. A feeling of excitement mixed with fear filled the two girls. They decided to follow the sound to find its source. Leaving the bedroom, they carefully walked out into the dark hallway and headed for the stairs. Step by step, they went down to the first floor, still hearing the knocking leading the way. The knocking continued, as if inviting them. It led them to the basement door. Tina opened the door, and both girls stood on the steps, looking down into the dense darkness below. Karen asked, "Mom, are you down there?" Knock, knock, knock. Despite their excitement, they were too scared to go down to the basement. They stood there, asking a few more questions and getting answers in the form of knocks. But after about 30 minutes, the knocking stopped. The encounter with Dad. So excited by the experience, Tina and Karen decided to wait for their father, Frank, to return. When Frank entered the house in the middle of the night, the two girls ran up to him, their eyes shining, telling the story. "Dad, Mom was here. She answered us with her knocks. We talked to her." Frank looked at his two daughters, silent. He felt the excitement, but at the same time, the sadness of loss was still evident. He said softly, "Girls, I'm sure your mom is always here. She's always watching over us and looking out for us." Although Frank was not sure what the knocking was about, he knew that the girls' faith was the greatest comfort to them at the moment. When the girls saw the terrifying writing on the wall, they were terrified. A piercing scream echoed through the silence of the house, and they immediately ran up the stairs, not daring to look back. Fear overcame them, and they had no choice but to flee the house they had once thought was their safe haven. They ran out the front door, not stopping until they reached the neighbor's house. The neighbor's door swung open after their frantic knocking. The neighbor, a middle-aged man with a puzzled expression, looked at the girls with concern and asked, "What happened? Why did you run here?" The girls, shaking and barely able to form words, only cried out in panic. "Oh my God! We had a seance, and we heard knocking, and now someone is writing on the wall. We don't know what it is, but it's horrible." The neighbor listened, unable to hide his confusion. What they were telling sounded like an unbelievable ghost story, but seeing the genuine fear on their faces, he couldn't let them go. "All right, go inside," he said. "You'll be safe here. We'll wait for your father to come home. He'll know what to do." The neighbor led the girls into the house, closed the door, and tried to calm them while they waited. The girls, in a state of panic, could barely sit still. Finally, their father, Frank Bowen, returned. The neighbor immediately waved to him. "Frank, come here," the neighbor said, his voice urgent. "What happened to your girls?" "They came running over here and said someone wrote on the wall." Frank frowned, not understanding what was going on. He turned to his children and said firmly, "Stay here. I'll check the house. There's nothing to worry about." However, he didn't think it was anything serious. To Frank, this was just a continuation of the delusions the girls were experiencing. He believed they were overreacting because of their grief over the loss of their mother. Frank entered the house alone. The air inside was cold and quiet. He carefully checked every room, every corner. Finally, as he walked down the stairs to the basement, his eyes fell on the words scrawled on the wall. It read, "I'm in your closet. Come find me." Frank shivered, but tried to stay calm. As creepy as the writing was, he didn't believe anything supernatural was going on. After searching everywhere and finding no one in the house, he returned to the neighbor's house and confronted his children. "I know you wrote those notes," he said, his voice tinged with reproach. "I know it's all in your imagination. It probably started because you missed your mother, but now it's gone too far. I think it's all a product of your grief. You convinced yourselves that the house was haunted." The girls looked at their father in disbelief. They knew they hadn't written the note, but they also knew that their father would never believe them. In that moment, they almost wondered if what he said could be true. Could the pain of loss really have made them imagine things? Frank continued, "Starting tomorrow, you're going to grief counseling. We need professional help to deal with this." "I should have done this a long time ago." The girls, in their vulnerable state, just nodded in agreement. They had no choice. The next day, they began their counseling sessions. Strangely, from that moment on, all the mysterious phenomena in the house stopped. No more knocking on the door, no more creepy writing appearing. The Bowen household returned to its previous peaceful state, at least for a while. On December 8, 1986, after 3 weeks of peace, the Bowens returned to face the strange phenomena. During that time, the house seemed to have returned to a normal state, with no more mysterious noises or any signs of supernatural disturbances. But on the evening of the 8th, everything suddenly changed. Frank, his daughters Tina and Karen, and their friend Kathleen returned home from a night out. As they stepped onto the porch, Frank paused at the front door, peered out the window, and noticed something unusual. The lights were on in the house, even though he was certain he had turned them all off before leaving. A strange feeling gripped him, but he tried not to let his anxiety show. Frank glanced back at the girls standing right behind him, as if to confirm that they were not the ones who had done this. However, none of them could explain why the lights were on. After a few seconds of confusion, Frank unlocked the door and walked in. Before he could call out to his daughters, the scene inside stunned him. The TV was on at a loud volume, the radio was playing intermittent music, and every piece of furniture in the living room had been moved. Things were not in their usual places, as if someone had deliberately moved them to create chaos. Frank froze, turning to look at the girls. Tina and Karen had seen everything and were shaking. Kathleen covered her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. Despite his confusion, Frank tried to stay calm, telling himself that maybe this was some kind of prank or some strange mistake. But deep down, he knew this was not normal. Instead of calling the police, Frank walked into the house, turning off the TV and the radio. The girls followed close behind him, looking around fearfully. The first floor was full of strange signs, but no one was there. Frank quickly climbed to the second floor, continuing to check each room. Although he searched the entire second floor and the attic, he found no sign of strangers. Finally, Frank led the girls down to the basement. Each step they took on the old wooden stairs made an eerie sound in the quiet space. But the basement was empty, too. Having checked all the main rooms, he remembered that he had forgotten a small room on the first floor, right near the entrance. It was a small living room with a large window overlooking the street. Frank told himself that this was the last place to check. Taking the lead, Frank slowly walked towards the room. The girls, arms tightly clasped, followed closely behind. As he approached the door, a cold air seemed to rush through the hallway, making all four of them shiver. Frank took a deep breath, his hand on the doorknob. He slowly pushed the door open. The small living room was dark, but there was nothing unusual. A small closet was in the left corner. Frank turned on the light, illuminating the entire room. There was no sign of anyone. But then, a strange sound came from the closet, like a very small whisper. Frank stared at the closet door, wondering, "Is anyone there?" he said, his voice filled with anxiety. No one answered. He walked over, his hands shaking as he opened the closet door. Inside were only a few coats and old shoes, but on the wooden floor there was a message scrawled in white chalk. "I'm back," Tina screamed, pulling Karen and Kathleen back. Frank stood there, eyes glued to the words. A heavy feeling echoed in the space, as if the house had been taken over by an inexplicable presence. Frank walked into the dark living room, the light from the only window dim and cold, creating an eerie atmosphere. Right in front of him on the opposite wall, the words, "Marry him," appeared strangely, written in shaving cream, the letters scribbled but clear. Frank stood there, eyes fixed on the unusual words. He felt a chill run down his spine. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered, his eyes darting around the room for answers. Behind him, the girls Kathleen, Karen, and Tina hunched over, leaning close together. They were silent, a sense of tension filling them. Suddenly, a soft noise came from the closet in the corner of the room. Frank turned, staring at the closet door. It shook slightly, making a creaking sound. The knob slowly turned, and the door opened, revealing a figure stepping out of the darkness. The figure wore an old white dress, the dress that had belonged to Frank's dead wife. His face was painted like a clown's, pale with red and black strokes that emphasized his madness. In his hand, he held a large axe, the shiny blade reflecting the dim light in the room. Frank stood still, his eyes fixed on the stranger. The man stared at Frank, then back at the three girls. Kathleen, Karen, and Tina froze, unable to move, only staring at the ghostly face. Frank quickly regained his composure, stepping forward to shield the three girls, his hands behind them as if to protect them. He said firmly, "Go! Up the stairs! Quickly!" The girls rushed upstairs, but the stranger began to advance. Frank kept his distance, not letting him get close to the girls. He led the three girls into the first bedroom upstairs and slammed the door shut. "Stay here!" Frank shouted at them. Outside in the hallway, heavy footsteps echoed. The stranger approached the bedroom door. Frank held the door tight, but the maniac on the other side pushed hard, creating a fierce struggle. Tina, in a panic, looked out the bedroom window. She saw the street below and decided to act. She rushed to the window, opened it, and jumped out. The fall left Tina in sharp pain, but she did not stop. She ran straight to her neighbor's house, banging on the door and screaming, "There's someone in my house. He's got an axe." The neighbor immediately realized the seriousness of the situation and called the police. Within minutes, police cars were roaring, their red and blue lights sweeping the neighborhood. Frank, still clinging to the upstairs bedroom door, saw the police approaching. He shouted, "There's someone in my house. He was just here." The police quickly set up a ladder to help Frank, and the other two girls escaped to safety. The Bowens were taken to a neighbor's house for shelter. After everyone was safe, the police began to search the house. Guns drawn, they checked every room, every dark corner. Finally, they found the axe lying in the back sliding glass door. This door was partially open, as if the madman had escaped through it. The police found no trace of the stranger. They turned to talk to Frank. "We searched everywhere but found no one. Maybe he escaped through the back door." Frank felt uneasy, but there was nothing more he could do. His family was protected by the police all night, but the image of the stranger in the clown costume and face still haunted everyone. The house became quiet, but in the hearts of Frank and his family, an invisible fear still lingered forever. Frank Bowen and his daughters went through days full of haunting and tension. After being confronted by a stranger in their own home, the family decided to temporarily leave the house for safety. The police promised to monitor the house 24/7 and conduct an investigation, but for 2 days, everything seemed strangely quiet. There was no sign of the stranger, no one came or went, and the investigation in town turned up no clues. The eerie silence made Frank, despite his unease, begin to think that everything was back to normal. 2 days later, Frank, who was staying at a family friend's house, decided to return to the house to pick up toiletries and some other necessities. He figured this would be no problem, especially since the police were always outside the house. When he drove up, the first thing that confused him was the absence of police. There were no patrol cars or officers in sight. A vague sense of foreboding flashed through Frank's mind, but he decided to get out of the car anyway. As he started toward the front door, out of the corner of his eye, he seemed to see a blurry figure moving on the second floor. He jerked his head up, but saw nothing. "It's probably the police patrolling inside," he reassured himself. Still, the unsettling feeling made him decide not to take the risk. He turned to the nearest neighbor's house, borrowed a phone, and called the police to confirm the situation. When the police answered, they confirmed that they had no one inside and that surveillance was still being conducted from the outside. By the time Frank arrived, there had probably been a shift change between officers, creating a temporary gap in surveillance. They instructed Frank to turn back, assuring him that an officer would be there soon to assist him in checking the house. When Frank returned, this time he saw a patrol car parked outside. He walked over and explained the situation to the officer. The officer, after listening, confirmed that no one had been in or out of the house during the entire time. However, to reassure Frank, he suggested going inside to check. The door to the house opened, and the police entered. He was immediately shocked by what he saw. The first floor of the house was filled with chaos. Coins were stuck to the ceiling, creating a bizarre scene. Furniture was moved and arranged in odd ways, such as chairs stacked in strange shapes. Champagne glasses were scattered everywhere, and on the walls, kitchen knives were stabbed straight into family photos. The center of horror was the photos that were stabbed through. The knives were always aimed at the faces of Frank's 2 daughters, Tina and Karen. Notably, on each photo with a dagger, the words were scrawled in a terrifying manner. "I will kill you, Tina," or "I will kill you, Karen." The police officer, fully aware of the seriousness of the situation, immediately withdrew from the house and called for reinforcements. In the meantime, he contacted Frank again, informed him of the incident, and asked him to stay outside, away from the house. At this point, no one could predict what would happen next. But it was clear that the Bowen family was facing a much greater danger than they had ever imagined. The story begins on a cold afternoon when police officers arrived at the Bowen family home to investigate the strange phenomena that had kept the family in fear for months. In the snow-covered landscape, the officers found no trace of anyone entering or leaving the house. However, the horrors they were about to discover would be unforgettable. The Bowen family, including Frank and his two daughters, spent months haunted by mysterious knocks, footsteps, and even the feeling that someone was watching them. The incident culminated in the girls using a Ouija board to communicate with the spirit of their deceased mother, and they began to hear knocks in response, as if from the other world. What they did not know was that, in the darkness of the basement and the walls around them, a real person was watching their every move and word. After searching the entire house and finding no one, the police officers went down to the basement, where they finally discovered the grisly truth. One of the officers, while leaning against the washing machine, noticed that it was moving. When they pulled it out, they discovered a hole in the wall that led to a small tunnel. This tunnel is not only a shelter, but also a place where a teenager named Danny Allant, 16 years old, has been living for the past 6 months. Danny Allant secretly dug this tunnel after feeling rejected by 15-year-old Tina Bowen, who he had feelings for. Unable to accept the rejection, Danny decided to break into the Bowen family home, cut a hole in the basement wall, and started living in the walls. He not only hid but also observed, listened, and often sneaked out to cause panic, creating mysterious sounds to make the family believe they were haunted by a spirit. Danny did not stop at just scaring. He gradually became more daring, even sneaking into the girls' bedrooms to create a sense of fear. Every night, he knocked on the closet door, moved the furniture, and then disappeared before Frank could catch him. But when his madness was exposed, Danny did not stop. When he was discovered and arrested, Danny appeared unusually calm. But 10 months after being released on bail, he struck again, this time killing the Upson family in Massachusetts. Danny Allant is now serving a life sentence, but his story remains a reminder of the madness and obsession that can exist in everyday life. The Bowen family, thanks to Tina's quick thinking as she jumped out of a window to escape, were lucky to escape, but they will forever be haunted by what happened in their home. The CNN workspace where Johnson works is always bustling with activity. The sounds of reporters arguing over the news, the clacking of keyboards, and giant screens flashing breaking headlines. This is where the biggest stories in the world are shaped and broadcast to millions of viewers. Johnson, the head of the newsroom, was a man respected by his team. For nearly 2 decades, he had worked tirelessly to make CNN a leading name in the media industry. With his strong leadership and tireless dedication, Johnson was not just a manager, but also a visionary for the entire network. Since its launch, CNN has changed the way the world consumes news. By providing news 24 hours a day, with reporters available to broadcast live from anywhere in the world, CNN has not only reported, but influenced. And Johnson's job is to maintain and enhance that dominance while ensuring that ratings stay at their highest. A surprise call from a retired general. In the midst of the chaos, a knock on the door pulled Johnson from his focus on the screen. His secretary entered, her face tense. "You got a call from General Miller," she announced. "He seems very upset." Johnson frowned, but he wasn't surprised. He was used to dealing with angry people in this business. He picked up the phone and heard a harsh voice on the other end. "Johnson, I just got word about a report CNN is planning to air. Do you have any idea how dangerous this is?" General Miller, CNN's top military analyst and a well-known conservative, continued speaking, his voice filled with anger. He said that the upcoming report alleged that the U.S. military had used poison gas in a secret military operation in Southeast Asia, killing both soldiers and innocent civilians. Johnson tried to reassure. Johnson calmly replied, "I understand your concerns, General Miller, but I assure you that this is the result of nearly a year of thorough investigation." However, his explanation did not calm the general's anger. "Neither I nor the CNN military team were consulted on this. How could you report on such a controversial event without going through us?" Johnson felt the heat of the conversation, but he had no intention of backing down. This was more than an episode. It was the first project for a new program called CNN News, in partnership with Time magazine. The project had been heavily promoted, and a last-minute withdrawal was unacceptable. "I respect your opinion, General Miller," Johnson said firmly, "but the show will air as scheduled. This is an important story, and I believe the audience has a right to know." The general's warning. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before General Miller's voice came through, cold and warning. "You are making the biggest mistake in the history of CNN. You will regret this decision." Johnson held the phone steady, showing no sign of hesitation. "This story will be a blockbuster," he replied. "It will change the way the world views the war." Without another word, the general hung up, leaving Johnson alone in his office. He took a deep breath and looked out at the bustling office. He knew he was facing a risky decision, but he also knew that journalism had a duty to expose the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. The storm is coming. Johnson didn't know that this decision would not only send CNN into a tailspin, but would completely change the way the network was perceived. The Tailwind episode would be a bomb, but not the bomb he expected.